Everybody in the Learning First Alliance, everybody listening to this, students, adults, administrators, board members, you all play such a unique role. And it may seem like very broad things that we're talking about, but there's always going to be something that you can do utilizing your strengths in your role to make a difference. You don't have to be the one who is doing everything. You use your talents in whatever position that you're in. If you're a student, use what makes you feel strong. If you're an administrator, a teacher, we all have unique talents for a reason. So you don't have to go and take every single piece of advice. Just do what you can. And doing what you can, utilizing your strengths, is still going to make a profound impact.
I think within ourselves, we're able to learn more about each other and our different perspectives and views, and even open our minds a little bit more to what we've already known or already know, because it doesn't matter who you interact with same age, with younger age or an older age, you always learn something. And I think we all hold a passion for it, which is what it's all about.
I love talking to people who also have a passion for creating change in the community and trying to do their best so that the people that come after them also have like a good time and they get to have better than they had, and people who are just really passionate about something, no matter what it is.
Welcome to the second of our 3 podcasts, Learning and Listening with Students. I'm Richard Long, Executive Director of the Learning First Alliance. With me today is Dr. David Osher, Vice President of AIR and author and editor of many works, including Creating Safe, Equitable, and Engaging Schools. David, this podcast focuses on engagement, but how do you use that concept?
That's a really interesting question, Rich. The themes that we are focusing on include safety, they include equity, and they include engagement. And they all depend on caring relationships. Equity and safety are enablers. They're also disablers when they do not exist. Engagement, which is we'll hear from young people, is affected by the relationship they have with the people around them, is the fuel that drives learning. It's also a fuel that feeds our soul and drives our well-being. And as we listen to young people today talk about how they experienced meaningful engagement in the learning process, it's useful if you would also think yourself as the listener. What was it like and what is it like when you are deeply engaged in learning?
And I think that really points nicely to giving us direction as to what we should be listening for when we're listening, but what should we be listening for from the students?
They give a perspective on the process that perhaps is different from what we adults will bring to it. For example, when I asked my 15-year-old granddaughter, what should teachers do to support students' creativity, she looked at me with a doll-like look and said, engulf them in learning. Now that is so obvious. And even though I have spent half my career as a teacher, I would not have framed it that way. And so what it is both a perspective that may be different from us, but also a perspective that is sensible, that deepens, that makes much more profound our understanding of what are the basic essentials to the work that we all want to do, which is to support people's thriving and to support people's learning.
And we talk about the students. Tell us a little about these students that you're bringing to us for this podcast.
This is a group of students whom I did not know beforehand, with the exception of 2 students who I had met because they served on an editorial board for the Interagency Working Group on Youth Programs. These young people were recruited because of the fact that each one of them in their own school and community had been involved in political and social engagement regarding trying to make their school and their community better. And they were recruited because of the fact that they were identified as people who would give an unvarnished, authentic, honest perspective on the issues we were talking about.
I think, David, having listened to the students before and been part of the interview process, we're going to find something truly unique here. And I think we should start kind of help the listener here by giving them the transition of what was the question you actually asked them to begin?
Describe what it's like when you are deeply engaged in the learning process. What were the people around you doing? What were you experiencing?
Thank you. And with that, David, we're going to hear from the students.
I think to be deeply engaged in the learning experience, there has to be a connection between the educator and the student. First off, the educator has to know the student, obviously their target audience, one way to put it, and what they're teaching that student and that group of students. And then the students have to be willing to learn as well from that educator. And for that connection to happen, there has to be some type of trust in the content that the educator is putting out and the discipline and the respect that the student's giving that educator as they're receiving the content. My school kind of went through a period of time where there were like teachers coming and going because we are majority military kids school. So we had teachers that were attached to the military by like spouse or maybe other family relations. And there almost was a shortage, you could say. So I think that we had teachers coming in and a lot of new teachers in the last couple of years, and the students really had to jump right into a new learning environment. And for me, my freshman year, I had one new teacher and we were almost like his guinea pig, but it was very clear from the beginning, his curriculum, his teaching methods, and he was kind of really honest with us. And he was able to put everything out front about what he wanted to do. And we were able to communicate like as freshmen, even though we were young in the school, we were still able to talk to him about how we wanted to learn. And he was able to tell us how he could make those things happen.
I think it's mainly about having that student to teacher connection on both going through this process together of learning and teaching and making sure you're staying on the same page, that I feel open, that I feel confident enough to ask questions or ask follow-up questions when I don't entirely understand something. And then the teacher is actually okay, even if it takes like an extra 5 minutes to break it down a little more to make sure the students understand what exactly they're learning and what they want to learn. I think as much as there's teachers that dedicate that as a teaching method, unfortunately, it's not always the case. Sometimes you come across teachers within a certain school where they have certain expectations. A lot of students can often move up to the next grade level, but they don't necessarily already have an understanding or they are up to date with the curriculum that they're expected to know once they reach that grade level. When you come across a classroom where students are unable to follow up with the teacher, but the teacher is on a tight schedule, they have this lesson plan that they have to get them. So with the teacher's moving on, but the students are still feeling neglected in a way and don't necessarily catch up. That's when the students end up getting very confused. They end up questioning what they have to do, but at the same time, they also wouldn't want to fail. So that's when students are just trying to find their own ways of understanding things, or even if it just ends up shitting off a partner because they're not understanding, but they see their peers understanding. So it's like, well, how come they can understand, but I can't? That goes back to understanding your teacher's techniques of teaching, and they also have to recognize how students can teach or how students can learn, because not every student can learn it with just visuals, with just audio, with just written breakdowns of problem solving. It just comes down to balance. It comes down to a student wanting to learn, like you just said, and the teacher willing to teach. And it's always a different story in different schools. It's always a different story with each youth, because everyone can be in the same classroom. There could be a teacher who could assume that all students understand what they are being taught or what they're supposed to learn. But at the end of the day, students can still leave the classroom with questions and confusion until the next day. But because they don't feel that confidence to speak up on those lessons, because they could feel mentally like they're not there yet where they're supposed to be, they could start letting that get into their heads, which makes them not want to speak up. And it's just a continuous cycle.
When you are excited about the things you're learning about, when it's something you actually want to learn, and when the person teaching you is also engaged, like there isn't just one person talking. It's like you're having a conversation, but you're also learning from that conversation.
To experience a learning environment that is richly engaging, I would say, for foremost, it keeps me interested. Like the content we're learning, even if it's not something that I'm necessarily interested in, like a subject that I'm not really good at, the learning, the way it's taught, the class structure, I'm interested in that. And thus it keeps me going in the class. It keeps me motivated. I would say, just to add on to what everybody else was saying, a pillar of engagement in the schools also happened outside of the classroom, maybe with like academic counselors. That was a big thing that I think helped my engagement in high school. I had a conversation with my academic counselor at least once a year, and she helped me to plan out the course of my high school, which courses I was going to take each year, which courses I was going to take online, which courses I was going to take in the summer. And that really kept me engaged with my own education. And it made me invested in myself. And it helped to keep me interested and motivated because I knew that I was on a track and that there were people along the way, like my counselor, like my peers, like my parents, to help keep me moving because they knew the track that I was on.
So I'm going to take another path here. I think everyone has already spoken a lot on how it feels to be a student in different ways. I would want to comment on how I can engage as a community member, because I honestly think that that's not common enough in our student body for them to feel empowered and actually truly understand what's going on in our education legal systems and education politics, because there's so much that we can do. It's just that people don't know how to do them. And sometimes people don't think that it'll make a change. Any way that students can establish themselves as a person who needs to be heard, not just as a student in the system, but also as a member of the community. So for example, I live in California, but we have a lot of representatives. Even if I'm not in their district, if they are in a committee or a subcommittee that has something to do with me, I know that I have the right and power to go up to them and say, hey, I care about this issue and I think this is what you should do about it. And it's kind of disappointing to see that not a lot of students or youth do take advantage of that. So I think that's my way of knowing if we can be engaged in the system or not, is if we have enough students that are being engaged, not only within their local education bodies, but also with their state and federal student bodies.
All righty. So let me go one step further. And I wanted to introduce it by talking about one bit of thinking I did in my leading of the book, Create Safe, Equitable, Engaging Schools. In the chapter on involving youth in schools, I wanted to be clear that the issue is not just to engage young people, it's also to be engaged by them. They're actively shaping the adults. And so I would like your guidance on not only what are good ways to engage young people, but what are good ways to be engaged by the young people where they are more in the driver's seat.
I think that in order to engage students to make a safe and equitable environment, you can't not include the students. When you're trying to engage students and make something equitable, it's a great idea to include that group in your planning and in your decision making. There have been so many times at my school on my student senate where I was like, oh my gosh, the teachers and the faculty, they're always figuring out what they can do for students, but I've never been asked as a student what would help me. And that's a great way of engaging students, getting that feedback and opening up that conversation, allowing your students to have an opinion, encouraging that opinion and nurturing that opinion and using that opinion and that feedback to make your schools more engaging. And I think open conversation like this, I find this to be a very engaging conversation because we're bouncing off each other. We're giving feedback. It's all great. So that would be my first thing, is to include that group in whatever you're doing. And I think for students to become more engaged, it took me a while to realize that it is okay for me to have an opinion and it is okay for me to go and do something important. Because for the longest time, I was just plagued by the idea that young people can't do anything important because we're young. And that's kind of how we're stigmatized. But once I found out that, hey, I can do something important and it can be meaningful and it can make an impact, is when I started doing things like this. And so I really urge students to take some time and really connect with themselves and connect with their potential and their passions and channel that despite what you might be hearing in the media, despite the slide remarks that people might make, and engage through your passions. If you're passionate about something, channel that. And then schools to be responsive. If a student is passionate about something, nurture that, hear them out, give them an opportunity, speak to them. I think that communication and that intersectionality of let's not have the school and the students work against each other. Let's have them work with each other to create these safe and equitable environments.
I would say being open-minded, because the only example I have is my school. My school, as a student voice committee, they want the students to be engaged. They would invite students in the group, and we would actually discuss about the matters on ground, and we would give them our opinion. But at the end of the day, they do whatever they want. So you're engaging the students, you want to hear their opinion, but you're not actually listening to them. I would say not only make us join organization, actually listen to our voices. And I would say being open-minded, because some adults who believe they're kids, they don't know what they're saying. You can actually learn things from a young person as long as you're willing to listen. And many adults are not. I would say, honestly, being open-minded, try out the things that they are talking about. You never know if it might work. And listen, let us see that we are actually making changes in our environments. Like, oh, we came up with this plan and they actually executed the plan. They listened to what we were saying.
I feel like the biggest thing is obviously teachers and students are not equal to teachers. They went through school and all that, but teachers can maybe see themselves, or senior officials in the school can see themselves as less of above the students, and they tell the students what to do. And it's because I say so and stuff like that, and seeing themselves as they also can learn from the students and being more receptive to what students are saying, and maybe not take any like feedback or have opportunities for students to give feedback. That's another thing I liked about my school. We had surveys almost every quarter, almost every semester. And then teachers also had their own individual surveys. So students can honestly and freely speak about what they felt could have been done differently, what they would have liked to see, so the teacher can change and improve for the next time period. And I think that's another way that teachers can be engaged, and senior officials can be engaged by students, being receptive and not just being like, well, because you're a student and you're young and you're a teenager, there's nothing that I can learn from you. There's always something that we can learn from one another. You just have to be open to learning and to receiving that information.
I was thinking about it while the others were talking, and I think the most effective and most true and most applicable thing that I can say as a student is just to love the students, is to be kind. And I know teachers and administrators and parents and the adults of the school all know that it is difficult to be around kids 24/7 and be kind to them all the time. But I think that's the most effective way to generate change and to influence students in a more positive way, is just to be kind and show them that you care and that you do want to see them succeed. You do want to see them happy and you do want to see them healthy, and just showing that you love them as a student, as a child. I think that's the most important thing that schools can do.
That certainly was impressive to hear how many different ways the students define engagement. It is clearly very important to them and something we should pay attention to. But David, what do you think the key message is for educators from this?
There are two big messages. The first is, if we really want to succeed in what we're committed to supporting students learning to the maximum level possible and supporting their ability to thrive in this very, very hard times, supporting student engagement is hugely important. It will help us do our job. It will enable us to be more effective. But there's a second message, and that is, as attuned as we are to our students, let's even be more attuned. Let's even listen harder, because of the fact that they can help us see things and hear things that we may not be thinking about or listening to or attuned to. And at the same time, if we do that, we are going to enable them to hear things from us and to tune into things that we also are trying to communicate with them, because they will be nurtured as well as be appreciative of the reciprocity of a learning process where teachers and students and other educators learn together and also work together to make school communities more powerful.
Thank you, David, for adding perspective into this highly nuanced and highly complex system between educators, communities, and students from the student's point of view, and help us to understand and simplify not the ideas, but to simplify our understanding so that we can go forward and focus on the right things. Your guidance and comments, as always, are highly appreciated, and we thank you.
And I thank you as well, Rich.
And we hope you, the listener, join us for our other two podcasts, one on safety and the other on equity. Until then, thank you.